The sky was quiet when they found the wreck. Snow drifted over the shattered metal, whispering across the wings like a shroud. The German patrol approached slowly, rifles raised, unsure whether death or defiance still breathed in the twisted steel. A lone propeller blade stuck from the earth like a gravestone. The cockpit glass, frosted and cracked, held the face of a young man who looked strangely peaceful, as if the sky had simply carried him home. No smoke. No burning fuel. Just winter silence, and the faint echo of war trembling through the clouds. A Luftwaffe officer knelt beside the fuselage and wiped at a bullet hole no bigger than a coin. His glove trembled. Not from the cold. From confusion. From the impossible. This crashed Soviet fighter should have been a loss. One plane, shot down and buried in snow. Yet 10 minutes earlier, 7 German aircraft had spiraled from the sky like falling stars. 7. Not shot down in a dogfight. Not picked apart by clever turns or daring maneuvers. They fell after a single dive. A brutal, reckless plunge so steep that even the clouds held their breath. Witnesses called it madness. A death wish. A suicide with wings. And yet, in those 3 minutes of roaring descent, a lone Soviet pilot carved a legend across the frozen front. Some say they saw fire trailing his aircraft. Others swear they heard him laugh through the engine roar. But the snow at the crash site told a quieter truth, a letter tucked into his flight jacket, sealed tight, ink trembling across the page. If I do not return, understand this. I was already dead the moment they invaded. The wind shifted. The snow settled. Silence held the sky. Dawn crept over the eastern front like a wounded animal, dragging pale light across frozen earth and fields hushed beneath winter's breath. The war had stripped the land bare. Trees stood like black bones against the horizon. Barbed wire dangled frost like tiny knives. Footprints froze solid where soldiers never returned to claim them. The air tasted of metal and ashes, as if memory itself had burned and drifted through the sky. At a small Soviet forward airfield, half buried in snow outside Stalingrad, a single Yak fighter sat idle beneath canvas tarps patched more times than they were sewn. Icicles clung to its wings. Oil cans crouched beside it like silent, cold-bellied animals. Mechanics worked in hushed rhythm, coughing into scarves and stamping numb feet into the ground that felt harder than steel. The sound was steady, dull, almost prayer-like. Inside a wooden barracks only a few yards away, Lieutenant Aleksei Voronkov laced his flight boots with fingers stiff from cold and fear he would never confess aloud. His breath drifted like smoke. A small stove burned in the corner, but it barely warmed the plank walls. The room smelled of wet wool and gun oil. Maps hung like funeral flags. Red string marked German advances like spreading veins. The silence here was not peace. It was the quiet held in lungs before a scream. Alexei paused, tying the final knot. He closed his eyes, not in prayer, but in memory. A house by a river. A woman laughing by a samovar. Bread still warm in his hands. A promise whispered at the doorway before he left for war. Her hand on his cheek, trembling. "Come home," she had said. "Whatever happens, come home." But war ate promises the way fire eats paper. A knock broke the memory. "Comrade Lieutenant," a mechanic said, voice rough as gravel. "The Germans patrol the ridge again. Command wants eyes in the sky." Alexei nodded. Fuel. Barely enough for one flight. A moment passed between them. They both knew what that meant. A single flight was a gamble. A question thrown at fate. Would the plane return? Would the pilot? Winter had made every sortie an argument with death, and death rarely debated long. Alexei pulled on his leather jacket. The fur collar brushed his chin, stiff with frost. He tucked a folded letter into his inner pocket. Paper felt heavier than metal when words lived on it. He had written it last night under the dim lantern glow, his pen shaking at the thought of things unsaid. Outside, snow squeaked beneath his boots. The wind carried the sound of distant artillery like rolling thunder pushed through broken teeth. The front never rested. Somewhere beyond the haze, German tanks crawled forward like armored insects hunting warmth, desperate to choke Stalingrad into silence. A sentry crossed himself when Aleksei passed. Not superstition. Habit born of watching men take off and never return. The yak waited, wings dusted white. A mechanic wiped frost from the canopy glass, fingers trembling. "We heard Luftwaffe chatter on the radio," he muttered. "A patrol of Messerschmitts. Maybe more." Aleksei climbed into the cockpit, metal biting through gloves. The seat was cold enough to numb bone. He strapped in with the slow, deliberate motions of someone preparing either for flight or a coffin. Sometimes they were the same thing. "Engine," the crew chief called. The propeller coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, shaking snow loose from the fuselage. Exhaust steamed in the blue light. Birds startled from a distant tree, wings beating hard against the quiet. Aleksei lowered his goggles. His breath fogged the glass before clearing to reveal the runway ahead. A strip of packed snow, uneven, patched by desperate hands. Beyond it stretched the frozen world, wide and merciless. For a second he sat still. The engine growled beneath him like a caged thing. The world blurred around the edges. He whispered, not to God, not to ghosts, but to the weight inside his chest. "I won't die on the ground." He throttled forward. The yak lurched, skis biting into snow. Wind tore at the canvas edges. The runway rushed beneath him in white smears. Then the ground fell away. Gravity loosened. The sky opened like a wound. Up here, the world was both endless and thin. Clouds hung low, gray bellies swollen with ice. Far below, trenches cut the earth like scars, and tiny figures huddled around fires that barely pushed back death. Smoke rose from Stalingrad's ruins, curling like grieving fingers toward heaven. The city looked less like a battlefield and more like a graveyard that refused to finish dying. Aleksei climbed higher, engine humming through the cold air. His breath rattled in his mask. Every nerve inside him stretched tight, waiting. The sky felt too quiet, too wide. Empty skies never stayed empty long. His radio crackled. A thin, broken whisper. "Voronkov, report. Any sign of enemy fighters?" He scanned the clouds, squinting. The horizon trembled with pale sunlight. Snow glittered like shattered crystal. For a moment, beauty cut through the dread. It almost felt like flying used to feel. Before war. Before his brother vanished at Minsk. Before the trains rolled east carrying the nameless and the damned. Before the world shrank to crosshairs and fuel gauges. Dark specks against the morning sky. Then he saw them. Growing. Splitting. Wings catching light like blades. 7 German fighters, sliding down from the clouds in cold formation. Messerschmitts. Fast. Sharp. Hungry. His breath stilled. "Contact," he whispered, though no one needed to hear it. The enemy formation moved with eerie grace, sharks gliding through silent water. Their prop wash left thin trails like chalk lines drawn by fate. Aleksei felt the moment tighten like a noose. He was one plane. They were 7. His fuel gauge already flirted with emptiness. He could turn back. Dive to the ground. Try to outrun them. But his base was too close, too fragile. If he fled, they would follow the smoke and find the airfield. Men would burn. Machines would die on the ground, trapped like animals. Fear trembled in his chest, sharp and hot. Survival clawed at him. But duty sat heavier. The German lead fighter dipped its wings. A hunting gesture. A signal. The pack fanned wide. Aleksei inhaled. Frost stung his throat. Something inside him settled, not calm but certain. He touched the pocket where his letter rested. Words of love. Words of goodbye. He did not know which would speak today. His gloved fingers tightened on the stick. I do not run. Clouds swallowed him as he climbed, engine straining. The world turned into swirling gray silence. Time stretched. Heartbeats sounded like distant artillery. His mother's voice drifted through memory. Courage is quiet, Alyosha. Fear is loud. He burst from the cloud top into bright, merciless sunlight. Blue sky burned. White mist ripped past the canopy. Above him, the German fighters climbed to meet him, sharp silhouettes cutting the morning. 7 black crosses. Aleksei whispered the date under his breath, as if carving it into time. January. Stalingrad. The world frozen at the edge of ruin. He banked sharply, engine screaming. The airframe shook. His heartbeat thudded like boots on frozen ground. Voices from the radio faded into static. There was only sky. Only breath. Only the moment before impact. A diary line flashed in his mind, written by a pilot lost weeks ago. Up here, death does not chase. It waits. A shadow crossed his wing. A German fighter dropped into firing position behind him. A flash. Tracers cut through air. One passed so close he swore he felt its heat. Aleksei did not think. He dove. Nose down. Full throttle. The world tilted into madness. The sky rushed to earth. Clouds shredded around him. Silence broke open into roaring air. Gravity yanked at his bones. His vision blurred. The needle spun into the red. It was not a tactic. Not a maneuver. It was a fall. A fall that looked like surrender. A fall that felt like defiance. And the Germans, sensing blood, followed. The ground surged upward. Snowfields opened like white jaws. The forest below waited like sharpened teeth. Aleksei held the dive. Breath burning. Wings trembling. Heart pounding so hard it felt like a drum calling fate. If I do not return, his own letter whispered from his pocket. The sky screamed. The earth rose. The world narrowed to one question that lived between heartbeat and crash. What would a man give, not to survive, but to matter? The dive deepened. The moment stretched thin as glass. Somewhere behind him, German pilots realized too late that a descent could become a weapon. And then, for a heartbeat, the war froze. The world narrowed to a single line, sky surrendering to earth, gravity clawing at steel and bone. The yak screamed through the air like a falcon in freefall, wings shuddering as if they might tear themselves loose and dance away into the wind. Frost blurred. Clouds tore past in white streaks. And behind Aleksei, 7 hunters became 7 witnesses to a descent that should have ended in fire. Altitude spun away like sand in an hourglass. 3,000 meters. 2,500, 2,000. The Messerschmitt pilots followed at first, confident, jaws ready to snap shut on a lone Soviet bird. Predator instinct. Pack logic. The first, then the second, locked him in their gunsights. Their radios crackled German syllables vacuumed by wind. But then physics whispered danger. Their needles began to scream into the margins. Metal strained. Airspeed turned from ally to assassin. One German broke first, wing tips shivering as he pulled up hard, nose clawing toward safety. Another hesitated, then followed. But 3 remained on Aleksei's tail, stubborn, hungry, unwilling to accept that a man might choose the ground over their bullets. Aleksei's teeth rattled as the canopy shook. The dive felt like falling through glass that never shattered. He imagined his father's voice, years before war and hunger carved their family thin. When death waits above you, fall beneath him. Wolves cannot bite the earth. He had laughed then. As a boy, fall meant play. Now it meant bargaining with eternity. 1,500 meters. Wind shrieked like a living thing. His goggles shook. The strap cut into his temple. His breath came short and fast. The yak was no longer a machine. It was a stone hurled by a furious sky. He angled slightly, not toward safety but toward threat, forcing the remaining Germans to commit deeper. A dance of doom. A lesson in gravity and madness. 1,200 meters. A crack formed on the canopy edge. Just a hairline. Barely visible. But Aleksei saw it. Felt it. Heard the brittle music of stress and strain. He tasted copper on his tongue from where his teeth had cut skin. He whispered to himself. A language made from memory. Not yet. 1,000 meters. A Messerschmitt behind him buckled into a wobble, pilot fighting physics, then peeling away hard, leaving a silent contrail of panic behind him. That left two. Determined. Or foolish. Or perhaps they too carried letters in breast pockets, written for someone who would never open them. The forest below grew teeth. Pines stood like dark spears waiting to impale sky and man alike. 800 meters. Aleksei pulled, hard. The stick bit into his gloves. Every muscle in his back trembled. He felt the airframe scream, a tortured howl rising through the fuselage like a soul trying to escape a dying body. The yak didn't climb. It didn't rise. It clawed. 600 meters. The first German overshot, unable to match the savage correction, his aircraft flipping past Aleksei in a desperate blur. The pilot's helmeted head flicked in terror as the earth rushed at him. He vanished into pine shadows with a roar and a bloom of flame swallowing branches like fire. Paper. He felt it, heat touching memory. Then gone. The second German tried to fire, but the angle was wrong, the dive too wild. Tracers stitched empty sky behind Aleksei's tail, bright threads in cold air. His engine choked, then caught. The yak shivered, body bruised by speed and stress. 400 meters. He jerked the stick again, harder, lungs burning. His vision narrowed to a tunnel lined with frost and prayer. For a heartbeat, nothing responded. The plane felt like dead weight. Then the wings caught air, grabbed it, wrestled it into lift with a grunt of metal. Aleksei's stomach lurched as the yak skimmed treetops, skis nearly kissing the snow-dusted pine tips. His breath punched out of him, not relief, but raw survival, as if he had borrowed one more second from a clock that wanted it back. Behind him, a second German clipped a pine crown. Just a whisper of contact. But enough. The impact twisted his wing. The Messerschmitt spun sideways, sideways, sideways again, like a leaf caught in the hunger of the wind. He vanished into the forest in a roar of splintering wood and fire. 2 gone. 5 still roaming the sky above, regrouping, confused, scanning for wreckage where no wreck lay. Aleksei did not smile. There was no triumph in surviving gravity. Only borrowed breath. His hands shook on the controls. The yak wobbled, wounded. Oil pressure dipped. The engine rattled like bones in a tin coffin. He pulled up low, hugging the land. White drifts rolled beneath him, broken by trenches, shattered farmhouses, burned haystacks blackened to charcoal skeletons. Horses frozen in fields stood like statues of winter's cruelty. A sled half buried in snow lay abandoned, ropes curled like dead snakes. Somewhere out there, soldiers marched on bloodied feet. Somewhere hunger gnawed ribs like wolves gnaw bone. Above him, the remaining Germans circled fury through frost clouds, scanning. Hunting. Confused. Who dives willingly into death and rises from it again? Only a man with nothing left to lose. A crackle sparked through his radio. Static danced. Then a voice, thin and worried. Voronkov, report. Do you copy? He hesitated. Words felt too heavy to push out. Finally, breath steadying, he answered. Still airborne. A pause followed. A stunned silence. The kind shared by men who expected ghosts and received instead a heartbeat. Enemy status, the radio officer asked. Aleksei scanned the sky. Dark shapes regrouped far above, circling like vultures unwilling to land just yet. 2 down. His voice shook, not from pride, but from exhaustion and disbelief. 5 searching. Another pause. Then a whisper. Human. Trembling. How? Aleksei exhaled. Frost crawled his goggles from the inside. He wiped them with his thumb, smearing cold into cold. I fell. Silence again, crackling through wires. You, what? He closed his eyes briefly, seeing branches whipping by inches beneath him, seeing fire bloom in the tree lean, hearing the groan of steel bending beneath the sky's cruel hand. There is no fear in falling, he murmured. Only in landing. The radio officer swallowed audibly. Snow wind filled the speaker. A cough. Then. Return immediately. Fuel status. Aleksei glanced at the gauge. Needle drooped like a dying flower. Critical. Then come home, Lieutenant. Home. The word sat strange and delicate on his tongue. His home had been ground into memory by artillery. His street swallowed by war smoke. His brother buried in nameless snow. Yet the pilot waited for him to return, as if there still existed a place beyond war and winter. He banked east, wings trembling. The horizon glowed faint orange from distant fire. Dawn didn't feel like promise here, only accusation. Behind him, the Germans finally spotted his trail. Their engines snarled like awakened wolves. 5 black shadows peeled toward him, disciplined as whip cracks. Aleksei tightened his harness. The leather creaked. His heartbeat thumped steady now, resolved. Running would not save him. And if he led them home, they would kill everyone there. Mechanics. Sentinels. Young boys stuffing snow in boots to stay warm. Men who prayed only to see another morning. He could not run. He could not return. So he chose the sky. The Germans dove again. He pulled up, climbing steep, engine coughing, altitude bleeding like slow drops from an open wound. The Messerschmitts rose behind him, black crosses etched against silver cloud. Their guns flashed. Tracers sliced past his wingtips. He jerked left, right, a wounded bird refusing to fold wings. The sky narrowed once more to instinct and breath. He spotted thin cloud cover above. High. Thin like fragile silk. But enough. He climbed toward it, yak groaning. Oil splattered the windshield. Heat gauges quivered near danger. The aircraft shook like a living beast gasping for final breath. The Germans closed slowly. They smelled the end. Predators tightening jaws. At the edge of the cloud layer, Aleksei made his choice. A choice not taught in flight school. Learned only in war where logic dies before men do. He cut throttle. The yak lurched. Air stalled under the wings. The plane dropped, nose tilting, belly exposed, speed dying like a heartbeat fading. The German formation, committed to speed, shot past him in a blur of black and silver teeth. For one frozen heartbeat, sky and death swapped places. Aleksei punched throttle again. The yak bit air. Guns spoke fire. He stitched the back of the nearest Messerschmitt with bullets, metal spitting into metal. The German plane shuddered, tail shearing, spiral blooming like a dark flower dropping into the abyss. Fear echoed through the remaining pilots. Predators shook. Humans reappeared inside uniforms. They scattered. But war was not polite. And gravity remembers those who taunt it. Aleksei dove again. Not as deep. Not as long. Enough to reset the sky. Enough to strike once more. Tracers laced the clouds, German screams half swallowed by radios. One broke formation wrong, wing clipping vapor wrong, spiraling wrong, disappearing wrong into the white. 3 remained. Aleksei breathed frost into lungs that felt carved from stone. His vision faded at the edges. The world tilted. His fuel gauge kissed zero like a lover saying farewell. He whispered again, voice barely breath. One more. He rose to meet them. The third German did not fire. He fled. His plane angled high, abandoning the kill, abandoning pride, abandoning the cold doctrine that had told him Russians break easily. They did not break today. Aleksei almost pitied him. Fear on a battlefield looks the same in every two fighters. But time caught him. Engine sputtered. Metal coughed, refusing to burn fuel that no longer existed. The yak trembled, nose dipping. Altitude bled away. Clouds parted beneath him to reveal frozen earth waiting, patient as a grave. His radio crackled once more. Voronkov. Status? He did not answer. Words felt unnecessary in the face of inevitability. The yak's propeller slowed. Wind whistled through cracks. Snowfield stretched like eternity. Far above, 2 Germans circled warily, unsure if they hunted or survived. Aleksei reached into his jacket. Fingers scraped cold fabric. He touched the folded letter inside, edges softened from rereading. He did not open it. It was not for him. The earth reached up. Snow filled his vision. A river glinted like a silver scar. Pines blurred. His last thought was not death. It was a kitchen lamp glowing warm in winter. Bread rising. Laughter beside steam. A promise whispered at a doorway, hand on his cheek. Come home. The sky exhaled him into the white. Snow swallowed the world long before the engine stopped humming. The yak rested crooked in a shallow drift beside a frozen river, nose half buried, tail jutting like a gravestone against the pale sky. Steam curled from its exhaust one final breath before vanishing into winter air. Silence settled, cold and absolute, as though the war itself dared not step closer. Inside the shattered canopy, Aleksei Voronkov opened his eyes. Pain hovered in the space between thought and bone. Not sharp. Not screaming. Just a heavy ache, as if winter had crawled inside his ribs and laid down to sleep. His fingers twitched. His breath fogged against cracked glass. The world existed, and so did he. Barely. He swallowed, throat raw. The cockpit smelled of fuel and cold metal, and underneath that, the faint copper sting of blood. His gloves trembled as he touched the controls, more instinct than intention. But the yak didn't move. It had flown its last argument against gravity. Now it rested, a tired creature brought to earth by exhaustion rather than defeat. Wind drifted snow across the wings. Pine branches rattled in the distance. Somewhere, a crow called once, sharp and accusing, then fell quiet. Aleksei pressed a hand to his side, felt warmth spreading through wool. A slow leak of life into winter. He looked up at the sky, pale blue fading to bruised gray. No German fighters circled overhead. No engines hummed through the clouds. He was alone. A blade of air where war had simply forgotten to look. Minutes passed like fragile glass, each one ready to crack. He pushed the canopy open with effort, hinges stiff, frost fighting every movement. The glass lifted. The wind rushed in, sharp as needles against his skin. He sucked in air that tasted like snow and iron and the faint smoke of distant battles. His boots clunked against the frozen fuselage as he climbed out. Knees buckled, the ground tilting. For a heartbeat, he almost collapsed. But he braced against the wing, breath shuddering through him. Snow rose to his calves. Cold crawled into his bones without asking permission. He scanned the tree line. Pines stood tall and silent. The river lay frozen, its surface cracked like old porcelain. No movement. No tracks. Only the emptiness of land abandoned by warmth and mercy. He touched the yak's metal skin one last time. Cold enough to bite. The aircraft that had carried him through sky, through fury, through a death dive carved by desperation and defiance. It deserved a grave, but the snow had already begun the work. "Thank you," he whispered, voice barely sound. Words felt strange, fragile things out here. But gratitude mattered, even to steel. He turned toward the forest, boots sinking softly into powder. Each step felt like walking through memory, heavy, slow, uncertain. Blood warmed the snow in small drops behind him, a quiet trail for ghosts to follow. The silence of the wilderness pressed around him. Heavy. Endless. Not peace. Peace is a choice. This was emptiness, absence, the hollow between two breaths of war. Then faint sound. The crunch of snow that was not his own. Aleksei froze. Heart stilled. His hand went to his holster. The pistol felt light, almost insulting against the idea of enemy patrols. He crouched slightly, breath held deep in his chest. Listening. The sound continued. Slow. Careful. Human. Aleksei drew his pistol, barrel shaking in cold stiff fingers. Pain sparked in his ribs. He steadied himself against a birch trunk, eyes narrowing against wind. A figure emerged through snow haze. Soviet brown. A fur hat. Rifle slung over shoulder. Gloved hands raised slightly, palms out. "Comrade pilot," the man called softly. Aleksei did not lower his weapon. He studied the face, young, raw, cheeks wind-burned, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "We saw your dive," the soldier murmured. "Watched from the tree line. Thought you died." He blinked, breath forming trembling clouds. "Everyone thought you died." Aleksei's knees softened. Relief did not come as joy. It came as exhaustion so heavy it nearly buried him on the spot. He lowered the pistol. "Not yet," he whispered. The soldier stepped closer, reverence in his posture as if approaching a monument carved by miracle and madness. "You took them," the soldier breathed. "God above, you took them from the sky." Aleksei opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Not pride. Not explanation. Only the heavy beat of memory, fire through pines, wings breaking, the world tilting between life and silence. The soldier reached under his coat and pulled a canteen. "Water," he offered. Aleksei drank. The liquid was barely melted snow, colder than his veins, but it felt like fire down his throat. When he finished, he leaned back against the birch, breath drifting into winter's stillness. "How far?" Aleksei asked. "Outpost is near the ridge," the soldier said. 5 kilometers. 5 kilometers. On bleeding ribs. Through snow that swallowed footsteps and dreams alike. Aleksei nodded once, a soldier's acceptance of distance and pain. "We go." The soldier moved ahead, clearing path. Aleksei followed, one step then another, each footfall a negotiation with the body that wanted to lie down and let the snow decide his fate. Wind swept across the plain. Snowflakes clung to his lashes. The world blurred between exhaustion and determination. They reached a ridge crest as light weakened, sun smearing orange behind skeletal trees. Smoke curled from a hidden trench below, a Soviet forward shelter half buried, its roof camouflaged with frost-covered branches. As Aleksei descended, voices murmured inside the dugout. The soldier ahead called out. "Pilot found. Alive." Silence dropped inside the trench before boots scraped dirt and heads appeared. Faces hardened by winter and hunger stared as if seeing a ghost step down from the clouds. Aleksei's legs buckled. Strong arms caught him. He sagged, breath shuddering from his chest. Someone guided him toward the dugout entrance, warmth leaking faintly from within like breath from a cracked chest. Inside, men crowded around the narrow space, steam rising from breath and worn blankets. Lantern light flickered against walls of packed earth. The smell of boiled barley and sweat and iron filled the shelter. A nurse, no older than 18, guided him to a cot. Her hands trembled not with fear but urgency. Needles in this war were as precious as prayers. Aleksei lay back, muscles giving way. Pain claimed him like a quiet tide finally reaching shore. The nurse pressed cloth to his wound. He hissed. She whispered apology, voice no louder than snow landing on pine. Questions came from every direction. How many did you face? Is it true you dove straight at them? Why didn't you run? Aleksei's eyes drifted to the low ceiling. Damp earth. Icicles forming along support beams. War had dug graves and homes from the same dirt. He answered slowly. Each word felt carved from frost. They followed. I fell. Physics killed pride. A soldier laughed, bitter and broken, the sound like branches snapping under snow. Better physics than bullets. Aleksei closed his eyes. Darkness tugged him. Warmth crawled faintly through his limbs. He breathed slowly, as if drawing life through a cracked door. Someone whispered near the cot. Pilot or martyr? Another answered softly, sometimes they are the same. The nurse tightened a bandage around his ribs. He winced. Her eyes met his, brown, fierce, hollow from nights spent stitching men into temporary life. You shouldn't be alive, she murmured. Aleksei offered the faintest flicker of a breath, almost a laugh but too tired for sound. Shouldn't, he agreed. She paused. Why did you dive like that? His fingers brushed his coat pocket where the letter lay. His voice, when it came, was soft enough to fade into the lantern hum. For someone waiting. The nurse nodded, understanding in the quiet way war teaches without words. Outside, wind scraped ice against trench walls. A distant engine rumbled through sky, then faded. Feet shuffled near the entrance, guards rotating, watching darkness for approaching wolves in iron coats. Aleksei drifted, neither waking nor sleeping, trapped between breaths like a moth caught in frost. A whisper cut the hush. A soldier outside, voice tense. Movement in the woods. Another answered, rifle cocking. Enemy. Silence. Then the snow cracked under unseen weight. Men froze. Aleksei opened heavy eyes. War had found breath again. The nurse leaned close, whisper laced with fear. Rest. The living will watch now. But peace does not belong to men who fall from the sky and rise again. He forced himself upright despite protest in bone and muscle. I can stand, he murmured. You need to lie down, she insisted. I need to finish something. Footsteps approached the dugout entrance. Snow shuffled. Rifles lifted. Breath gathered like storm clouds. A shadow appeared at the doorway. Cold spilled into the shelter. Aleksei's hand found his pistol again. Outside, wind held its breath. Inside, men braced, hearts locked between survival and surrender. The figure stepped into view. And the chapter ends not with gunfire, but with the quiet before it, the frozen second where every soul in winter chooses defiance or despair. Snow drifted in slow spirals across a ruined city, as if winter itself were too tired to fall. Berlin, 1945. Buildings stood like broken teeth. The Reich was collapsing, yet in the bunkers below, typewriters still clicked. Orders still whispered. Loyalty still demanded its final payment in fear. Sergeant Wilhelm Weiss sat in the ruins of a former police station, shivering though the room was warm. "Silence is loyalty," a voice in his memory murmured. The walls were stained by smoke and panic. Once they echoed with Gestapo boots and muffled cries. Now they echoed with nothing. He cradled a tattered logbook. Pages trembled in his hands. April 12, 1945, one entry read. "We received a boy today. He could not have been more than 11. He refused to speak. He refused to break. Orders followed. I do not want these hands anymore." His breath turned to frost in the air, though the stove glowed. The war was ending, yet the shame had only begun. He closed the logbook, but the silence stayed, clinging to him like smoke. Somewhere outside, a shell boomed. Dust fell from the rafters like ash from forgotten files. Weiss flinched, then steadied himself. "Not yet," he whispered. "I must finish this." A rustle. A lone raven perched on a shattered window frame, staring at him with a hunter's patience. Its feathers gleamed like polished boots. Another memory surfaced, an officer wiping blood from his gloves, muttering, "Loyalty is cleanliness." The raven blinked. It felt like judgment. "A diary won't save me," Weiss breathed. "But a truth must exist somewhere." The air tasted like metal and regret. Across a continent, a Japanese officer stood barefoot in a frostbitten yard near Harbin. Captain Kenji Ishikawa faced the entrance to a place most soldiers pretended didn't exist. Unit 731. The gates were bent and silent now, but he could still hear the echoes. Boots, wheeled carts, forced calm voices. And beneath them, the silence of the doomed. Cold wind scraped across the frozen ground. "Winter never leaves this place," he murmured. His coat collar lifted like a shield, but no thread could block memory. A smell clung to him. Not rot, nor smoke. Something colder. The scent of denial. In his pocket, he carried a folded scrap of paper. A name. Just one. A Chinese farmer who had asked him once, "Why children?" No answer had come then. None came now. A rusted medical tag lay half buried near his boot. He brushed snow from it with trembling fingers. His breath hitched. "Some things should stay buried," a voice behind him whispered. He turned. A former medic stood in the drifting snow, face pale, eyes hollow. "We are witnesses to our own ghosts," Ishikawa replied. "We were ordered," the medic insisted. "No order erases a memory," Ishikawa said. Wind moaned through broken glass. For a moment, it sounded like distant crying. Back in Europe, Allied soldiers moved like exhausted shadows through the black forest. Branches cracked under boots. A young radio operator, Private Samuel Clark, carried a dented field set on his back. His throat ached from cold and fear. "Signal check," a whisper came through the static. Clark adjusted the dial. "Receiving. Report." The voice was clipped, British, tired. Clark hesitated. "We found what looks like a transport route. Civilian clothing, chains, scorched papers." A pause. A sigh like a grave settling. "Understood. Document everything. History is listening." A bird shrieked overhead. Static faded. Clark ducked, heart racing. "Nerves again," he muttered. He exhaled, breath fogging, and pulled a folded paper from his coat. A scrap taken from a camp near the Vistula. Written in shaky German. "We counted days by shadows on the wall. When the shadows stopped moving, we prayed they simply tired." Clark swallowed hard, tucking it away. "You'll be seen," he whispered, as if speaking to the dead. "I promise." A twig snapped. Soldier instincts tensed. A gaunt woman emerged from the trees, blanket wrapped around bony shoulders. Her eyes held the heaviness of a world that had run out of tears. She raised trembling hands. Clark lowered his rifle slowly, gently. We won't hurt you. Her lips parted. No sound came. Silence again, heavier than gunfire. She pointed behind her, deeper into the woods. Clark motioned to his squad. Follow. In a frozen ditch near the odor, 2 German conscripts crouched beside a machine gun. Young faces, gray under soot. Do you think surrender will mean mercy? One whispered. The other stared at his shaking hands. Mercy is a story old men tell to sleep. He wiped frost from his cheek. I want to live. A distant artillery crash vibrated the earth. Smoke rolled across snow like a slow tide. The first soldier closed his eyes. My mother's last letter said the sky looked tired. A brittle laugh escaped him. Even the sky is tired. He pulled a torn piece of ration paper from his coat. A poem scribbled in pencil, smudged by fear. If silence had bones, they would lie here with us, under frozen earth, waiting for spring. He tucked it away. If we live, I'll burn it. If we don't, maybe someone will read it. The other soldier looked at him. And then what? Then someone will know we were not machines. A bird called again. The front remained quiet for one breath. Then roar returned, breaking the fragile peace. Berlin again. Night fell like a curtain. In a bunker office, an SS clerk stamped papers with trembling precision. Discharge, evacuation, final directive. His fingers shook each time the stamp hit. Outside, distant bombs cracked the night. A colonel paced behind him. We must destroy records. The clerk hesitated. His voice cracked like thin ice. Sir, if everything burns, then what remains of us? A future without enemy lies, the colonel replied. The clerk's gaze dropped to the towering stack of files. Names. Families. Fate sealed with ink. His hand hovered over a lighter. His breath sickened him. The air smelled of burning paper even before flame touched it. He whispered to himself, if I burn the evidence, I burn the truth. Microhooks in his mind flickered like dying bulbs. Screams in walls. Whispers in corridors. A child's voice asking, why am I here? He closed his eyes. A single tear slid down, tracing a clean path through dust. I was only clerical, he whispered. The most fragile defense in history. A crack overhead. Plaster rained down. The colonel barked an order. The clerk lit one file, then another. Flames bloomed. Smoke rose. A truth suffocated beneath bureaucracy. Yet in his pocket, he hid one folder. One name. One chance for memory. Soviet troops crossed the Vistula at dawn. Frost glittered like shattered glass. Lieutenant Sergei Markov marched with the precision of someone whose grief was older than victory. He carried a camera instead of a rifle. Nearby soldiers muttered. Photographs? For who? For those who will not believe, Sergei answered. A shriek cut the morning stillness. Not terror, but relief. A group of civilians stumbled out of the trees, arms raised. Hollow eyes. Starved limbs. Life clinging by threads. Sergei lifted the camera. His hands shook, not from cold. I am sorry, he whispered as he took their picture. Your suffering should not live only in shadows. A woman stepped forward. She pressed a scrap of cloth into his hand. Sewn initials, faded blue. My sister, she whispered. What happened? The woman looked toward the horizon. Her voice broke into a whisper. A train left. I was sick that day. She wasn't. Sergei's breath trembled. Tell me her name. The woman answered. Sergei repeated it, softly, as if reciting prayer beads. Then again. He would not let memory fade. Night deepened. Across fronts, across fences, across the last breaths of collapsing regimes, a question pressed against every soldier, every prisoner, every commander who had once believed the world could be shaped by fear. If survival demanded silence, what voice would remain when guns stopped? In Berlin, we stared at the logbook glowing by lamplight. In Harbin, Ishikawa closed his eyes against wind that sounded too much like souls. In forests and trenches and forgotten yards, people clung to scraps of truth like life preservers in a storm-torn sea. The war's end crept closer, but peace did not. The earth held too many secrets. And inside every survivor, guilt and grief breathed side by side like unwilling roommates. A diary page fluttered in the cold wind. Ink bled slightly, as if the words were not written but wept. We did not ask to become memory. Yet here we stand, carrying ashes in our lungs, praying someone, someday, will listen. A shell burst somewhere far away, echoing like a judge's gavel. Then silence returned, heavier than fire. And in that silence, the world waited for answers that history still struggles to give. Tell me, when truth is buried under boots and snow, who will dig it back up? Waiting. Dawn rose like a wounded thing over Europe, pale and unsure. The war had not ended yet, not fully, but its breath was weak. Front lines shrank. Radios crackled with half-truths. Boots marched slower, as if the ground itself resisted further violence. And in the frozen fields outside Dachau, Private Samuel Clark stood with a pencil, notebook trembling in his fingers. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke, but beneath it lingered something else, something he would never name aloud. Grief had a scent here. Barbed wire stretched ahead, frost clinging to steel like veins of glass. A watchtower leaned, riddled by bullets. Beyond the gate, silence hovered so thick it felt like another layer of winter. Clark whispered, "We're the first." No applause, no cinematic music greeted them. Just wind. Just the soft shuffle of boots behind him, soldiers breathing through scarves, each man hoping what he felt in his bones wasn't true. Then movement. A figure stepped forward. Human shape, but skeletal. Hollow cheeks, skin stretched thin over trembling bones. Shawl hanging like a memory over shoulders. Eyes wide, not with relief, but suspicion. Like freedom was just another trick the world might play. A medic murmured, "Dear God." Another voice, broken like thawing ice, "Are you Americans?" Clark couldn't speak. He only nodded. The woman stared, tears not quite forming, too dry to fall. Behind her, others emerged. Slow. Careful. Like prisoners of a nightmare afraid to wake too fast. Clark raised his notebook. He wrote, "Silence walked first. Then humanity followed, step by fragile step." A nearby soldier dropped to his knees, retching in the cold dirt. Not from sight, but from the weight of it. Starvation, disease, fear carved into living bodies. Clark closed his eyes. Snow landed on his lashes, tiny white ghosts. A survivor reached for him. Fingers brushed his sleeve. Light, trembling, almost apologetic touch. As if asking permission to exist. "I'm here," Clark whispered. "We didn't dream you?" the survivor asked. "No. You're awake now." A pause. A breath that seemed to span years. "We dreamed you," she said. "Every night. Someone coming." Wind carried her words like ashes. Miles away, the Red Army reached another camp. Snow clung to barbed wire like cruel lace. Lieutenant Sergei Markov lifted his camera again, but this time his hands did not shake. There was no space left for shaking. A Soviet soldier kicked open a shed door. Inside, quiet forms lay too still. Sergei lowered his lens. Some truths did not need film. They lived inside bone. A boy stepped forward, barefoot on ice. His lips blue, eyes enormous and haunting. He held something against his chest. Sergei knelt. "What do you have there, Malchik?" The boy opened his hands. "A button. Just a button. Gold-tinted, polished by small fingers. Maybe from a coat long gone. Maybe from someone he loved. A keepsake of someone memory refused to release." "Papa," the boy whispered. Sergei's breath froze in his throat. He could not promise miracles. He could not promise parents returned or past reversed. He could only speak truth. "We will remember him," he said quietly. "We will remember all of you." The boy blinked slowly, trusting or simply too tired to doubt. Sergei lifted his camera again and took a photograph. Not for proof. For tribute. In Harbin, winter tightened like a fist around Unit 731's ruins. Captain Kenji Ishikawa sat in a torn-down barack, boots soaked by melting snow. The building groaned in wind, as if protesting time. He placed a paper on the table. The name again. The farmer. A man who had asked for reason, not mercy. There were voices outside. Soviet troops approaching. Justice's footsteps in frozen and whispered, "I am not seeking forgiveness. Only remembering. Let remembrance be punishment enough." He pulled from his coat a brush and ink. Slowly, he wrote the farmer's name again. Stroke by stroke, steady as prayer. Outside, the Soviets shouted. Inside, ink dried like frozen tears. He set the brush down. Straightened his coat. Then stepped outside unarmed, surrender visible in the slump of his shoulders. The first Soviet soldier raised his rifle. Ishikawa lifted empty hands. "I am ready." Justice did not roar. It arrived quietly, boots crunching on ice, breath swirling like ghosts around steel. Snow fell heavier, covering footprints, as if nature tried to soften the scene. But memory does not soften. It stays sharp, like frostbitten skin. Berlin collapsed. Streets choked with rubble, smoke rising like morning cloth. In a cellar, Wilhelm Weiss sat with the logbook open to the final page. Bombs shook dust loose. Pipes groaned above. His breath came shallow. Sirens wailed. Orders screamed through corridors upstairs. But Weiss did not move. He could not run from truth now. The logbook lay like confession before him. Final entry, his handwriting. I listened. I watched. I stamped names. I did not strike, but I did not stop. And history will not care for that difference. His hand trembled as he wrote the last line. Remember them. Forget me. Flame from a lantern flickered. Shadows stretched like accusing arms. Weiss closed the logbook slowly, like sealing a coffin. He placed it inside a metal box and set it behind crumbled bricks, where maybe someone would find it someday. Maybe. He stood. Straightened his uniform. Not with pride, but resignation. A rumble above. Ceiling cracked. Dust showered him like gray snow. Weiss whispered one word to the empty air. Enough. The city answered with fire. Across Europe, radios crackled. German transmission, faint, desperate, all units, fall back. Save civilians if possible. American radio, camps confirmed. Survivors located. Repeat, survivors located. Soviet broadcast, bear witness. Document. Leave nothing hidden. Static answered. Then silence. And everywhere, survivors stepped into weak sunlight like flowers after a long night. They blinked at sky as if re-meeting daylight. Some lifted hands to face warmth they thought they'd never feel again. Some dropped to knees, soil beneath fingers sacred as scripture. Some did not cry. There were no tears left. A Polish doctor helping lead survivors out whispered, as if speaking to the earth itself, "You lived. That itself is rebellion. A woman looked back through the gate one last time. My family remained there, she whispered. Part of me too. Clark heard her and recorded it. History needed to remember soft truths as much as horrors. In a field near Munich, soldiers dug graves. Not mass pits anymore, but rows. Names when possible. Stones when not. A chaplain's voice cracked as he read. Not prayer, just presence. Clark stood nearby, notebook full, soul heavy, breath fogging in cold morning air. He wrote. In war, the living carry the dead inside them. Not as ghosts, but as warnings. A soft voice behind him. Will there be justice? Clark turned. The woman who first emerged from the camp stood there, blanket wrapped around thin shoulders, hair matted but eyes clearing. She held a tin cup of warm water, as if offering peace. He struggled for words. Justice is slow. But memory is faster. She studied him. Do you believe we will be remembered? Clark closed the notebook. I will remember you. Others will too. And if they ever forget, he looked at the camp gate, rusted and still. The ground will remind them. The silence will remind them. She nodded once. Then looked at sunrise. The light was thin, but real. For the first time, her breath did not shake. By spring, war sputtered to its end. But endings are not clean. Pain does not obey treaties. Trauma does not retire when guns fall quiet. Survivors relearned hunger for warmth instead of food. Soldiers tried to sleep without hearing ghosts in shell-shattered dreams. And the world faced the mirror, seeing not victory, but what humanity was capable of when led by fear and hatred. Documents surfaced, hidden notes, scribbled poems, smuggled diaries. Lives recorded in trembling lines. History found witnesses everywhere. A Soviet archive file, later discovered, read. Human evil is loud. Human survival is quiet. We must listen hardest to what does not scream. A small graveyard blossomed with wildflowers. Not planted. Just growing. Life stubborn as hope. Children ran there months later, not knowing their feet touched sacred ground. They laughed. Wind carried the sound far. Past ruins. Past barbed wire. Toward a world healing slowly, painfully, beautifully. And someone watching whispered. Never again is not a promise. It is a command. A command built from ashes and whispered names. The war ended. Memory began. If this story moved you, please like this video. Subscribe for more forgotten World War II stories. Comment where you're watching from, Texas, Germany, Australia. Thank you for keeping these memories alive.